Okay, this is a big one with a lot of ideas. So pace yourselves. Um, because you may have a question right now. Why is he doing this? Why is he continuing to do this to me? Because there are other sacks of shit in this house, right? There's two other misogynist, disgusting, vile sacks of shit in this house. And for the most part, they give me a lot of space, and I give them a lot of space, and, it's not pleasant, but it's not aggravating, it's not dangerous, it's not threatening to me. It's okay. But why is Martin so aggressively, determinedly, unceasingly out to get me, to hurt me, to threaten me, to intimidate me? Right? It takes a lot of energy to do that. Why is he doing that? And so the explanation, I'm afraid, is going to have to go back to how our minds develop, right? Psychodynamics. So human babies are born with extremely undeveloped brains, minds. And that's so we can fit through the birth canal. That really is why. Although even really taking it a step back further, we don't know why Homo sapiens have such giant brains. Like starting roughly around 1 million years ago, our brains started to grow and grow and grow. And actually that made us much tastier for our predators, because at that point we had a lot of predators. And they loved eating our brains, because our brains are like big, sugary, if you can imagine, they're like juicy apples for our predators. Our brains are delicious. They're sugary. They're fatty. So why did we develop these giant brains, these super processors, these supercomputer processors? We don't know. We just don't know. But we do know that we're born with extremely undeveloped brains, and we have an incredibly long childhoods. In fact, our brains aren't considered really fully developed relatively around 25. This probably is not much of a surprise, right, to the parents out there. But human brains, our childhood basically lasts till 25. I mean, give or take, right? People are different, but roughly around that. But the first 3 years, especially, are critical years for the development of our brain, and they lay the neural pathways for everything else. It's the foundation of our neural processing, and a lot can go wrong. Now, the way we know that these neural pathways are laid is by the quality of the connection, usually between the mother and the baby, right? It's a psychic connection. We call it attunement. And it's how well does she meet the needs of her baby? How well is she attuning, paying attention to, sensitively feeling what the needs of her unable to communicate baby is? Like, we are so dependent on our caregivers for a pretty long time. Incredibly dependent. And for comparison, like our nearest primate relatives, the chimps and bonobos, usually a baby is up and walking and feeding itself around 6 months, maybe a year, right? Our kids can't do that. So a lot happens in those years, and a lot is dependent on the quality of the attunement of the mother to the baby. And unfortunately, because of the patriarchy, there is so much potential for horrific disruption. I call it systemic disruption in that mother-child relationship. Especially the boys are vulnerable. Especially our boys are really vulnerable. So all of that is to say, I'm going to give a psychodynamic hypothesis for why Martin Igbinogun just cannot stop coming at me. And it's a safety issue, right? So if you can imagine, when you're a baby and you need to be protected by your mother, need to be fed by everything, she cares everything. And it really doesn't mean that his mom did anything wrong. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that as his neural pathways were developing, Martin maybe, and it could even be, actually, they've found a lot that even the mother's breast milk. Like if the mother is in a lot of stress, her breast milk has more cortisol, or they found that people who grow up with mothers who were under a lot of stress and they connect it to the breast milk have different characterological patterns than people who don't. Like it literally could even be just the breast milk is different. So many, it's a complex web. So, but Martin grew up, this is my hypothesis, not feeling safe, right, from the woman, from his mother or caregivers. Not feeling safe from them. Feeling like his needs weren't being met. And when you're an infant, we this is a catastrophic feeling, right? Because we don't have a sense of it's going to be okay in the end, or we're just learning what happens. And so it's a very catastrophic, existential, I'm going to die because the breast isn't in my mouth and I'm crying and no one's going to feed me. I'm going to fucking die because no one's feeding me. It's a catastrophic, horrific, traumatic thing. And it lays the groundwork for your neural pathways. So my theory is that men like Martin, unless he feels like he has me under complete control, right? Unless he feels like he has the woman in his house under complete control, he's dominating her completely, he doesn't feel safe, right? I mean, it's totally neurotic. Because, there's two other guys in this house who leave me alone, I leave them alone. So it's just a delusion he has, right? A neurosis, you might say. That unless he dominates me, unless he has me under complete control, he is in danger. And it's an infantile response from an infantile wound. I know I said I had to give you a big one, but that is really why. So there's nothing I can do to make Martin feel safe, because we're past that point. Like, there's nothing really anyone can do to make Martin feel safe enough to not stop dominating the woman in his house. I mean, potentially, right, if he saw that he had issues and he really wanted to change them, he really wanted to get better. Like, he saw it was inside of him. There was issues inside of him that he could maybe correct. He could probably go to therapy, and it would be hard. He'd have to go back to that infantile place of existential, I'm going to die, and he'd have to trust the therapist, and there'd have to be a lot of back and forth. But there's always a potential for healing. That's one of the wonderful things about the human mind too, is that we call it plastic. There's a lot of plasticity. We can rewire our minds. But clearly Martin has no insight at all. And that's, typically what happens with sociopaths. Like, they have no insight. They stop themselves from thinking. They don't have any perception that the problem lies anywhere inside of them. They're always the victim of outside forces, especially the woman, right? Somehow they're the victim. Somehow he's the victim of me, right? It's my problem behaviors. That was where we left it at a loss. My behaviors are the problem, not Martin's. But that's why I think that's why I think he struggles with this infantile lack of safety, pre-verbal, and no interest in correcting that, and so he's constantly driven to dominate, control me, because that's how he will feel safe, when he feels like he has successfully done that. And of course, unfortunately, he will never successfully do that. So here we are.